amount. So saying you want to sit in the first row, yes, I think that's probably. Wir machen es doch. Ach nee, weil dann ist ja der Platz, weil dann müssen die anderen immer hin. Das wird sonst so kompliziert. Ich glaube, das ist besser, wenn Sie in der ersten Reihe sitzen. Okay, so welcome once again. We have a big room and there are a lot of free chairs still in the front. So if I could ask the ones sitting in the last rows to just come up a bit. It'll just make for more interactive discussion. We don't have to shout. We don't feel like you're at the other end of the city, which is a small city. So welcome everybody to the side event, which is jointly organized, which is also officially hosted by GERMANWATCH, RAC France, the Réseau Action Climat France, and AVD from Cameroon. But we have a number of other organizations who are also co-organizers: AXIA, the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy Access; PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance; RCD, the Réseau Climat et Developpement, are all partners in organizing this event together. The event is on the African Renewable Energy Initiative and on civil society perspectives on that initiative. As you will all know, the initiative was one of the big flagship initiatives for short-term action that were launched in Paris with ambitious goals. We will hear first from my colleague Jens, just a quick rundown on sort of the main objectives of the initiative and the current state of play, just to make sure that we're all a little bit on the same page. And then we will have then we will have a presentation from Augustine from PACJA, who's also facilitating the AXIA, the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy Access, on a survey all the different organizations I just mentioned conducted together, asking African civil society organizations what their priorities are. And then we will have a round of comments, first from some African CSO voices, and then we have two government representatives with us as well, Seini Nafo from the African Group of Negotiators, and Frank Vasmetz from the German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. My name is Lutz Weischer. I work for GERMANWATCH. GERMANWATCH has followed the development of this initiative with a lot of interest from the beginning. But it's an Africa-owned and Africa-driven process, so we don't see our role as, we see our role more as facilitators of events like this, and hence I'm facilitating. But also, of course, since our government, since Germany is one of the largest donors for this initiative, as critical and sort of constructive engagement also with the donor side on what's going on within the initiative. With that, I would give the floor to Jens Klavitter, who's a policy advisor for international energy policy at GERMANWATCH, to just give us a quick summary of where we stand with the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative.
Yeah, hello, also from my side. Our main goal with our work at GERMANWATCH is probably bringing the perspectives of the African civil society to the attention of our host governments. And what I will do now, as Lutz said, is just give you a small recap of the initiative and what has achieved so far. So launched at the COP21 in Paris and endorsed and supported by African as well as international institutions. The initiative basically wants to harness and use the huge potential of renewable energies on the African continent, and it is Africa-owned and Africa-led. So there are basically two goals. One is related to energy access, which is in line with SDG number 7, and the other one is that the initiative wants to support and help the African continent to leapfrog towards a renewable energy-based system. And there are also two quantitative goals. The one is to achieve 10 gigawatts until 2020, and the other one is 300 gigawatts, at least 300 gigawatts of renewable energy until 2030. The initiative works according to a number of guiding principles, such as that renewable energy installations should contribute to sustainable development. It wants to address the whole African continent. It also wants to boost intra-regional and international cooperation. And it wants to promote all kinds of renewable energy technology, with one exception, that is large-scale hydro. And the key features of the initiative are its transformative approach in contrast to a project-by-project approach, its country ownership, and its multi-stakeholder engagement, and also things like sound environmental and social safeguards, as well as criteria. I will come to that in a second. And how does the initiative imagine the future renewable energy system of the African continent? You can see here, so from a more centralized approach to a more decentralized approach with using all kinds of renewable energy power plants, but also things like, energy storage and batteries. So there are in all 9 working areas, ranging from mapping of existing initiatives and experience to strengthening the regulatory and policy frameworks, but also things like capacity building and funding and project development. And there are some cross-cutting issues like the multi-stakeholder engagement or social and environmental assessment of technologies, for example. So therefore, to accomplish its work packages and work areas, and timeline has been presented. We are now in action phase number 1, which takes place from 2017 to 2020, and it's mainly setting the stage for the takeoff in 2020, all kinds of enabling activities. For example, a trust fund should be established, and making sure that the delivery unit is up and running. So what has been achieved so far? A couple of documents have been presented. For example, the action plan, where you can find for all of the working areas a very detailed plan of what should be actually achieved when. So that also is maybe useful for monitoring progress of the initiative. Then criteria have been presented. I will come to them in a second. And also a progress report has been presented in January 2007, which is from which I also mostly draw on for this presentation. So what has been achieved? The independent delivery unit is up and running, hosted at the AFB. There have taken place a couple of outreach and high-level events. For example, there was an outreach event or an AREI orientation event with AU ambassadors in Addis Abeba end of last year. And also a couple of high-level meetings at the COP in Marrakesh, but also before and after. Furthermore, the initiative tries to or strengthens the partnerships with international organizations like GCF, IRENA, and ICRE, for example. And the trust fund has been established at hosted also at the AFDB. Furthermore, a participatory multi-stakeholder engagement process, which should be significantly scaled up during 2017, is ongoing, and also the development of the safeguards should be actually carried out during the first half of 2017. So far, nothing official has been published on this issue. And then there are basically 3 big items. The one is the mapping of existing initiatives, and already mentioned the criteria and an assessment of existing projects or of an existing project pipeline in Africa. So what wants the mapping to achieve? There, as you know, there are many initiatives on the African continent related to renewable energy, and there's a certain risk for duplication, but also maybe synergies can create it between these initiatives and the AREI. So what the AREI is doing right now is establishing a database with these goals here more clearly defined. They also want to define a composite index, which I thought was very interesting, reflecting on the overall effectiveness of other initiatives. So I'm curious what comes out there. And here you can see how this in the end will look like. It's not right now already published online. but I think it will be made public at some point, so you can see details about other initiatives and also things like how they are related to AREI working areas. Then the criteria have been published last year. There are basically 3 different kinds of criteria. One, category A, is related to policy development projects. Category B, related to renewable energy installations and the so-called balance criteria. For the policy development projects, they can include things like economic instruments, but also regulatory legal instruments. Also things like capacity building, interestingly, and information education. And these are the criteria published right now. I would say you can see here the issues that are addressed by the criteria, and for all criteria, we can see, there were also developed indicators, which are very comprehensive, I would say. So for all of these issues, there are also indicators available. For category B projects, which could be projects producing electricity, but also thermal energy, could also be related to the expansion of the national grid or mini-grids or energy efficiency projects. You can see again the criteria published so far, and they also come with comprehensive indicators. For the balance criteria, they, in my opinion, should reflect or are reflecting whether or not the initiative is on its way according to the principles and its overall goal, and 8 balance criteria so far have been published. Then an assessment of the current project pipeline has been facilitated. This should not be mixed up with AREI-related projects. What has been done here is just a collection and assessment of ongoing projects on the African continent. And the first preliminary results show that most of the projects are related to renewable energy generation, only very few to energy efficiency or energy access. And looking at the gigawatts produced from these projects, there's a certain tendency or very clear tendency to large-scale hydro projects. And also, if you look at the spatial distribution of these projects, you can see that the region with the lowest energy access right now, Central Africa, has also the smallest amount of projects in its pipeline. I basically said that. And then last but not least, there was a board meeting in Conakry, Guinea at the beginning of March. And shortly after that, a press release has been stated by the European Commission. 19 projects were approved during this board meeting, and this has provoked quite some media attention, but also critical remarks from international and African civil society organizations. So some of the issues mentioned there is that the criteria have been bypassed, and it's not clear whether or not these projects are new and additional. And with that, I would like to give back to Lutz.
Thank you, Jens. And I'm sure we'll have time to discuss these with our panelists and then also with the audience later during the event. This was just to get everyone sort of a snapshot of where we currently stand. Would now like to give the floor to Augustine Yamshi from Cameroon, who's coordinator of the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy Access, and will present a survey of African CSO perspectives that we are launching today. The survey was conducted by AXIA with together with the Climate Action Network, with the Réseau, Climat, Developpement, and PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, as 3 large networks of African NGOs. and also supported by GERMANWATCH and Bread for the World, the German Protestant Development Service, as sort of with financial and technical help. Augustine, over to you.
Thank you, Lutz. Ladies and gentlemen, it will be recalled that the African Renewable Energy Initiative was one of those key initiatives that the African continent took to Paris for COP21, alongside with the African Adaptation Initiative. So we hold these two initiatives very high at heart. And for that reason, we, as African civil society with our partners, we decided to make a survey to know what the African civil society thinks about. So the presentation will have 5 sections, and I will rush through some of them and concentrate on the conclusions and recommendations. The survey was carried out between the month of October 2016 and December 2016. We had 25 responding organizations from 17 countries across Africa. So they come from all these 5 sub-regions of Africa. So it can be said it's truly representative of the continent, as you can see on the map. To see if the respondents actually focusing their work in the countries of origin, a few of them go beyond their countries of origin and are working in other countries, but the majority are focusing their work in those countries. So as you can see, we have East Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, Northern Africa, and countries from Southern African region. The background of the organizations, what are they generally doing? They are mostly environmental organizations. All of them work on environmental issues. A couple of them, about 16, focus on energy-related issues. Others are on development issues. Because this was a multiple question, you could cross many other points. So most of them are working in these areas, and a few of them work on HIV, human rights, community-based development, and climate change. About the level of work, where do they work? Most of them work at subnational levels. Nearly all of them, about 21, work at the national level. Others work at the regional level or sub-regional level, and then a few of them work at the international global level. Then what kind of organizations are we talking about? Most of them are non-governmental organizations. Others are networks, that is regional networks of NGOs. About their viewpoint on the experience they have on renewable energy, a few of them say they're experts on renewable energy issues. A good number of them have high-level experience on the renewable energy topics, and then the rest, medium. Awareness about AREI. Before we conducted the survey, how many of them knew about the existence of this initiative? 22 of them said they knew about this. Only 3 said they never heard about AREI before the survey. And then, to ask to the question, what are the energy challenges, key energy challenges in the countries in which they work or in their focus countries? Access to electricity for rural populations was high, was the highest. And you will agree with me that out of the 922 million people in Africa, about 622 million don't yet have access to electricity. And then also issues related to access for electricity in urban areas was also high. And then the cost, the price for households and social and environmental impacts of current energy systems were also some of the issues that they think are very severe. As to what the most severe energy-related challenges in the countries, this is what we've just said. And then the next point was wanted to know, do they know any other renewable energy initiatives on the continent? Yes, 13 said they knew, and then 12 said they did not know any other initiatives other than this AREI. And you can see the number of some of those initiatives. And actually 6 of these organizations work basically on these initiatives on the continent. Then for the second point, second part of the survey, which is to know the proposal criteria, which was focused on proposal criteria, wanted to know what are the important proposal selection prioritization criteria under AREI. Stakeholder involvement, that is governance, top the league with energy access as well as other issues. In fact, many of the things like effectiveness, mitigation, transformative potential, efficiency, and the rest, institutional stability, feasibility, and business plan and implementation are equally very, very important. Then they also suggested some other criteria like climate adaptation and progress made. As for projects related to energy, electricity generation projects, what are the important type of projects that should be considered under AREI? As you can see, production of electricity or useful thermal energy or any other relevant forms of energy from renewable energy sources. As far as they're from renewable energy sources, that is very, very important. The rest are equally important. Then the viewpoints about the types of generation projects, what level? Micro, small, and medium scale solar energy projects up to 5 megawatts of installed capacity are very, very important for African civil societies. And this can be explained from the fact that most of the isolated hamlets and villages, communities on the continent don't have access to the national grid. So if there's something like this AREI, it should be that which meets the needs of these communities. So that's why they put it on top on the list. Important criteria for prioritization of projects under AREI, whether they were important, some that were important or not. As for issues related to economic and financial issues, social and environmental issues, they were highest on prioritization, while those related to institution and technical ability were equally important, but not as important as the first 5 that I've mentioned. As to how to ensure an overall balance of projects across the continent, across the sectors, this is what we got. Projects that directly energy access oriented projects and programs were highest, followed by predominantly African countries and institutions receiving the support. And this can be explained from the fact that if AREI is really for the interests of Africa, African countries should receive the support that it needs to get this up and doing. Of course, the other viewpoints are still important. Then, as for the governing structure and the way forward, which is the key, should African CSOs have a number of seats on the steering committee, the governing structure? In majority, more than 20 of them are strongly agreed, and then a few others agree, and very limited number somehow agreed, and there was no disagreement or strong disagreement with this point. So in essence, the African civil society thinks that is of the opinion that we have to have a seat at the table because it is for Africans, and the majority of Africans are in the rural areas. Civil society is working with them, so they should have a seat if this has to work. Should African civil societies have voting power in the AREI steering committee? A majority, again, strongly agreed, and then the rest agreed or somehow agreed, while there was no disagreement. Because it is no use to sit at the table and not have a voice. So it's important that while we have a seat at the table, we should also contribute effectively. After all, the projects have to be bottom up, have to be those projects that meet the needs of the people on the ground, felt needs and not quick fixing. So for that reason, we have to have not only a seat at the table, but a voice while at the table. Then what are the potential critical factors that have been mentioned and which we see could be the stumbling block in this process? Exclusion of civil societies, non-participation from African civil societies and communities in decision making. Projects may be too large. We talked about Jens talked about 10 gigawatts in the short term. If you take 4 mega dams, they can already meet the 10 gigawatts, but it will not have met the needs of the majority of the population. So we think that projects may be too large, and then just to satisfy that we have done that, we have had the 10 gigawatts. Then lack of transparency is very, very critical. And then political background in some countries, lack of democracy, rule of law, and then where there is dictatorship, maybe they will not consider social and environmental safeguards, and hence will not meet the needs of the majority of the population. And then lack of funding and financial resources can be one of the stumbling blocks to this project, to this initiative. What can make it successful? The viewpoints of the African civil society were that involvement of local population, training, capacity building, down-up processes instead of top-down processes, social embedded projects, political will and public participation, and synergies with other initiatives so that it will not just be something that has fallen from the sky, funding and technologies transfer. These are the things that can make AREI a success and will meet the needs of Africa. Should Northern CSOs bring positions of African CSOs to attention of Northern states? Yes. A majority of us agreed, because it is not enough to support financially what is happening on the continent, but also there is some need of checking in the northern countries, and the voices of the civil society of the south of Africa can be heard by the governments of the north, who are generally the funders, through the partners in the northern hemisphere. So we strongly agree that the Northern civil society should bring the voice of the of African CSOs to the state governments. And then should Northern civil society also support African CSOs financially, logistically, and capacity-wise? A majority, more than 15, strongly agree. Others agree. More than about 7 agree. And then the rest somehow agree. There's no disagreement or strong disagreement with this. Potential topics or issues for African civil society to work on from African civil societies that we think they should be worked on: capacity building for NGOs, awareness raising for local populations and ensure participation of populations, advocacy, ensure positive social and environmental impacts of projects, choosing eligible projects. This is something that we think that is important for us to be engaged in this process. Then potential topics that the Northern NGOs should be working on: financing, capacity building for African CSOs, exchanging and sharing experience, capacity build, ensure voices of certain civil societies are heard in area policy, research, information, and then also funding. So this is the end of the presentation. I would like to answer some questions when the time comes, because the research was done in collaboration with many other partners who are here on the table, and some of them are here seated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Augustine. Maybe you want to mention that?
Yeah, as I said, we have this, we are launching this report today. We have a few copies available today, and that will be available for some people in this hall. If you stay to the end, you might have a chance of grabbing one. Then, and so, but we will be producing more copies that will be available on our stand, the PACJA stand, PACJA ASEA stand that is on the corridor. And, sorry. Is it online?
Yes.
Yes, it is online it will be on the PACJA website, as well as the website of the partners like GERMANWATCH and the rest of the.
I know for sure it's already on the Bread for the World and the GERMANWATCH homepages, and it will be on the other partners' websites as well.
Yes,
Is it already
as from today.
It will be soon on the other websites.
Yes. Thank you.
So now we really have a comprehensive overview, not only about the sort of state of play with the initiative, but also about what a number of African CSO groups that sort of work on the ground in Africa think would be important in the initiative, what their priorities and views are. Based on that, I think I would like to ask the two representatives from African civil society networks or groups here to also maybe share some high-level thoughts of what they think is, what can we take from all of this information? What are the most important recommendations given where the initiative stands, given what your members of your network say? What would be most important to take this initiative forward? And as we've seen in the first presentation, it has huge potential for transformation and for supporting development in Africa. What would be needed to realize that potential? First, we have Assiatou Diouf from ENDA in Senegal, who also represents the Réseau Climat et Developpement.
Hello, I'm Assiatou Diouf. Today I speak on behalf of Climate and Development Network. It's a French-speaking network, gather more than 60 French-speaking NGOs, mainly based in Africa, which work for the integration of climate and development issues in national and international policies. And we also take action on these issues through local projects by doing advocacy actions, both at local and international levels, to promote renewable energy, for example. So I will be very brief, just to share our key recommendation and expectation for RAE. We think that, as Augustine said, The participation of civil society in the operationalization of RAE is really important for us. How we can do that? By building capacity and raising awareness, enabling participation of African CSOs in decision-making processes in the board. We know that we have board in Addis, but we still advocate to have civil society in the process. Increasing transparency and granting civil society access to all renewable information. Because if we don't have the good information, we cannot work with people on the ground, with grassroots. And we think that it's really important to work and to sensitize people on the ground. Regarding this initiative, so we need to have information about the pipeline details, approved project, etc. And we think that we have also a key role on the implementing project and also about monitoring and evaluation of the project. It's important to know if RAE projects are really transformative. And if we are talking about energy, we think that it's not just electricity. We need energy for development. So we think that this point is really important for us and ensure that this initiative is truly African-led to meet the need of African people. About promoting access to energy for the most vulnerable population, we think that it's really interesting to have quick implementation of the African Renewable Initiative by funding in priority small-scale projects and decentralized solution rather than just major projects related to capital cities. So we think that we need to decentralize solution and projects for the poor communities. Adopting a gender-sensitive approach and promoting human rights. We are working to promote human rights at national and international level. So we think that this initiative should adopt a gender-sensitive approach and promoting human rights. Ensuring that the funds pledged in Paris are truly new and additional, and support activities that are consistent with the principle of RAE and criteria developed by RAE to delivery by RAE. And at least developing and enforce strong and social and environmental safeguards. It's the key recommendation for the RCGs, donc the French-speaking NGOs working on the ground on climate and development. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it'll be really interesting to come back to some of these, as well as some points from the survey later in our discussion to see how well we're doing or where the initiative could do a better job or the governance needs to be improved or reformed to really reflect these ideas. I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Paul-Alain Nana, who represents the Association Action Vitale pour le Développement Durable, AVD, from Cameroon, with some thoughts from your perspective.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Paul-Alain Nana, manager coordinated out of NGO AVD, Action Vitale pour le Développement Durable. Je vais briser le rythme parce que je vais faire ma présentation en anglais. J'espère qu'il y a des francophones. Je vais dire en français. Donc, je vais essayer d'être rapide. Il s'agit, je partage avec vous. Je peux
t'interrompre juste, just to say, I will give a quick summary at the end of the main points in English, or you will. One of us will. But we think many of you in the room do understand French, so we thought it'd be easiest for Paul-Alain to just give it in French.
OK, thank you. Donc, il ne s'agit pas des résultats de recherche comme mes précédents panélistes, mais d'une expérience que nous devons partager avec vous. Nous allons partir d'un projet que nous avons mené sur les énergies renouvelables pour pouvoir tirer des conclusions très, très sérieuses. Donc, la présentation que je vais vous faire est intitulée « Jeunesse et citoyenneté se conjuguent pour promouvoir le développement des énergies renouvelables au Cameroun ». Donc, le concept de développement durable, nous le connaissons tous, est un concept qui est en révolution et qui intègre de nombreux paramètres. Entre autres ces paramètres, nous avons les acteurs du terrain qu'on ne doit pas négliger. Nous avons la problématique à défendre. Nous avons le contexte local, également les moyens de mise en œuvre et enfin le matériel. Il est question de fédérer cela pour pouvoir mettre sur pied un projet sérieux. Comme disait Aïssa tout à l'heure, si nous allons sur un terrain sans connaître même effectivement le terrain, nous serons voués à l'échec si nous voulons mener un projet effectivement. Donc il est question de fédérer le contexte, les moyens et également tous ces aspects pour pouvoir mener à bien le projet. L'éducation au développement durable représente à elle seule un champ éducatif dans lequel un ensemble de disciplines sont concernées et elle permet une plus grande participation des apprenants dans le cadre de l'éducation formelle et informelle. Très souvent, nous allons mener des projets sur les énergies renouvelables au Cameroun, par exemple, sans impliquer la population locale. Et nous venons avec de l'outil moderne, alors que les populations bénéficiaires ne sont pas adaptées également à recevoir ces outils modernes. Donc, il est question de tenir compte de l'éducation informelle aussi. La résolution des problèmes sociaux pertinents et encourage l'investissement du personnel et des apprenants. Il est maintenant clair de mentionner que le monde de demain consommera renouvelable ou ne sera plus. Toutes les études le démontrent. Par exemple, le déficit de production d'énergie au Cameroun atteint quotidiennement des pics de 100 MW et tout ceci impacte significativement les activités économiques. Nous voyons donc qu'il est question de promouvoir les énergies renouvelables, d'une part pour sauver l'environnement, pour la protection de l'environnement et tourner le dos aux énergies fossiles, et d'autre part créer des emplois. Voilà. L'efficacité énergétique constitue l'un des enjeux majeurs des prochaines décennies et les pays du Sud, ceux de l'Afrique subsaharienne en tête, disposent d'un potentiel d'énergie inestimable. Au-delà de l'incessant débat nord-sud autour de la coopération énergétique, de l'aide au développement et des transferts de technologies, pourquoi ne pas jeter un coup d'œil sur les initiatives des acteurs locaux, encourager et éduquer la jeunesse dans la démarche éco-citoyenne? C'est dans cette optique que l'Institut français du Cameroun, en partenariat avec les associations AVD et Mieux-être, sous la houlette du ministère des Enseignements secondaires, a mis sur pied en 2015 le projet intitulé « Jeunes énergie propre ». Il était question d'impliquer la jeunesse, de préparer une jeunesse montante en leur impliquant les notions des énergies renouvelables. Parce que c'est cette jeunesse qui va prendre des décisions demain et cette jeunesse qui est l'avenir. Voilà. Donc, avant de vous parler des résultats du projet, je vous présente brièvement le Cameroun. Le Cameroun est un pays situé en Afrique centrale. Et ce qui est intéressant ici, c'est que le Cameroun a une diversité climatique. Voilà. Ce qui fait que toutes les formes d'énergie renouvelable peuvent être adaptées suivant les localités du Cameroun. Nous avons le Grand Nord, par exemple, qui est le Sahel. Il y a suffisamment du soleil. Ça veut dire que dans cette partie, on peut bien promouvoir, il y a le soleil, l'énergie solaire. Nous avons le Grand Sud, qui est proche de la mer. Nous avons l'énergie de la marée motrice. Nous avons l'énergie hydroélectrique. Nous avons l'Ouest, par exemple, qui est une succession de chaînes de montagnes. Dans cette partie, l'énergie adaptée peut être les éoliennes, par exemple. Donc, il y a une diversité et il est question donc de promouvoir cela. Le projet Jeunes énergie propre avait 3 objectifs principaux. Stimuler l'esprit de créativité et d'ingéniosité chez les élèves des collèges et des lycées en termes de développement durable et sur les énergies renouvelables. Éduquer et sensibiliser les jeunes et le grand public sur la nécessité de faire de l'économie d'énergie. Et enfin, susciter une génération de jeunes conscients des notions d'économie verte, de développement durable, pour se faire promouvoir la citoyenneté active. Voilà. Pour s'inscrire et s'outiller avec la totale implication des jeunes, les élèves ont pris part à de multiples activités. Il n'était pas question de venir vers eux parler des énergies renouvelables, mais il était question de les impliquer. Voilà. Donc, on a organisé les causeries éducatives au sein des établissements scolaires pour leur parler, de briser ce mythe qui est dans la tête des jeunes, parler des énergies renouvelables. On a organisé des conférences pour leur parler, pour ouvrir au grand public. Également des tables rondes avec des experts, animés par des experts sur des questions d'énergie et animés avec des jeunes. Et également des animations au sein des établissements. Il est ici question de promouvoir l'éducation informelle pour pouvoir passer le message. Briser le rythme, c'est-à-dire quitter un peu les salles de classe avec l'éducation formelle, avec des papiers, et aller un peu sur le terrain, apprendre en s'amusant. On a également organisé des visites d'entreprises, comme également le centre de production de méthanisation des déchets ménagers de ISACAM. On a également visité les laboratoires, les structures de recherche sur l'énergie, comme le laboratoire de recherche énergétique de l'Institut de recherche géologique et minière, également SOCAVER, Société camerounaise de verrerie. Donc, donc, les jeunes, en plus de la théorie, ont touché du doigt un peu ce qui se fait déjà dans le domaine de l'énergie renouvelable. Au final, 5000 collégiens et lycéens ont été touchés. Les jeunes, aidés par les experts, ont monté une exposition scientifique adaptée aux contraintes socio-économiques de leur propre entourage. L'exposition a été suivie par l'édition et l'impression d'un livret pédagogique, environ 3000 exemplaires, à destination des enseignants, des animateurs socio-culturels et des associations. Également, le compte tenu de la qualité de l'exposition Jeune Énergie Propre, le projet est devenu progressivement un outil pédagogique au service des enseignants au sein des écoles secondaires, voire universitaires. Action innovante en matière d'éducation populaire, le projet GEP a misé sur la durabilité de l'apprentissage par soi-même et l'aspect irrémédiable des constructions sur de nouvelles identités sociales. Son gage est de revoir se renverser le paradigme selon lequel les jeunes doivent apprendre des moins jeunes, de provoquer une remise en cause de ce qui est considéré comme correct aux yeux de la société, de susciter un questionnement sur les habitudes supposées à tort immuables. Les adolescents qui ont participé au projet, dont certains seront forcément appelés à faire des affaires dans le futur, apparaîtront peut-être comme rebelles à l'instar des premiers étudiants de développement durable, dont l'ambition est encore largement sous-estimée au Cameroun. Donc, comme partenaires du projet, nous avons eu des partenaires publics et privés qui ont soutenu le projet. Mais maintenant, cette génération a eu des notions sur les énergies renouvelables. Il est question, n'ayant plus de fonds pour pouvoir pérenniser cela sur des générations qui sont derrière, nous avons maintenant une génération qui est au milieu, qui a des notions, qui est outillée en termes d'énergie renouvelable, mais derrière eux, il y a une autre génération qui monte et qui ne doit pas saisir de la même façon. Donc, le but de notre présentation ici est de vous présenter les résultats de ce projet, mais également vous toucher les partenaires qui sont dans la salle, par exemple, de soutenir des actions pour que ça soit pérennisé sur plusieurs générations. Je vous remercie.
So a very short summary maybe of the main points. So he presented basically concrete experiences from a project they conducted in Cameroon, AVD, the Association Action Vitale pour le Développement Durable, implemented in Cameroon with support from the Institut Français and the French Embassy to reach youth, to basically a project in the context of education for sustainable development, to raise awareness about renewable energy and energy efficiency, that conducted a lot of activities in schools, but also took young people outside of schools to visit field visits of renewable energy projects, research laboratories, industries. It organized, how do you say concours? A competition for different projects developed by young people, and resulted in education materials that can still be used, that were printed and distributed to schools and can still be used. I think the interesting for our debate is are a couple of points. One, it really shows that there's a huge need. This project was developed, he explained, because the energy challenges in Cameroon are so large. The need for energy is huge. There are blackouts, and at the same time, environmental challenges are large. Pollution is becoming an issue. So, in his words, the only future there is, the future has to be renewable based. And I think the feedback you got from all the schools you went to, and in terms of all the partners you could mobilize, also proves that there's a huge interest in sort of this growing field. There's an interest from the young people to learn about it, and also to develop a domestic African industry or Cameroonian industry and jobs around this issue. Yeah, maybe that's sort of a very short summary of what you presented. Augustine, do you have a few points? Because you only presented the the survey.
Yeah.
Maybe you can say a few words about AXIA also. What's the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy and Access? And maybe 2 or 3 main points that you think are most important for the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative.
Thank you again. I think AXIA is the African Coalition for Sustainable Energy and Access, which is a platform for civil society organizations in Africa to articulate and get involved on sustainable energy discourse on the continent. And we have representatives on the board from all the African sub-regions. And it is less than 2 years old, so we are still finding our feet on the ground, but we hit the ground running by doing some of these activities and others that will be mentioned in other fora. What I could say, the key points, we want to say that African renewable energy was received with pomp and sundry on the continent. And we know that development cannot go without energy. If Africa has been pushed to the corner to take this clean development pathway, which is good for them as well, let it be in all earnestness and transparency. And having at the back of the mind that we're also going to contribute to solve a problem that the continent by no means created. That should never be forgotten. These are the basic facts. And if it is for the future, projects such as that of Alain are very important to guarantee sustainability. That is where his project comes in, to get the young people involved, get them be involved in the decision making, and even some projects on the field. These are some of the important things that we need to do. And that accountability, transparency, and governance is very, very important. We cannot solve a problem by using the same means, the same distribution system, access system, governance systems that are already governing the dirty energy that exists on the continent. Just because we're having it from renewable sources doesn't make it meet the needs of the people if we don't truly revolutionize the way we do things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I ask Frank and Saini to join us on the panel? I know Saini is also pressed for time because Africa Group coordination starts in 20 minutes, I think. We now have 2 free chairs, so you can probably stay and we can have a panel with everyone, I think, also for the discussion later. Or we all move one way over and then we can, you don't have presentation, so we can sit next to the, So Saini Nafo, who many of you probably know, is chair of the Africa Group of Negotiators, is from Mali, has been involved in developing the idea of this initiative from the very beginning. And we'd be interested in your thoughts on where the initiative currently stands, and also what you make of some of the demands and suggestions, recommendations from civil society we've heard this afternoon in terms of stronger participation, transparency, making sure development needs of Africa are met. Saini, over to you.
Thank you, Lutz, and good afternoon. At 6 o'clock, just before 6 o'clock, I'll need to be out. And, I've never missed a coordination. We've always started on time, and it seems that today we're not going to be able to do that. So I'll just go out and tell colleagues that I'm in a very important meeting, unfortunately. All right. So first of all, I really wanted to thank everybody in the room because I see all the different stakeholders. RAEI wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for all of you, African governments, partners, CSOs, journalists, if you can believe that. But yes, all of you, I wanted to really thank all of you for that. Coming into the meeting, I was not sure if the spirit of AREI was alive, but clearly after almost an hour here, I have no doubt, and that is quite refreshing to note. I could speak about this for a long time, but let me have 3 main points. The first one, let me try to put AREI in a context, because it comes out of a vision, and that vision is of an Africa which in the global multilateral climate process doesn't victimize itself. It comes from that vision of an Africa which takes its destiny in its own hand, and in doing that, reach out to its partners, to its friends. And that is what some of us coin the new African diplomacy, at least the new African climate diplomacy, which is we focus on specific thematic areas first. Second, we try to develop a very robust framework, action plan, work program, and then first, we try to bring around the table all the relevant stakeholders to work together in achieving that. And Paris, and we've had this idea for some reason, for some years actually, since at least Durban, and it just happened that in real life, there's moments that everything comes together, and Paris was such a time, but everything came together, and we were able to launch the Renewable Energy Initiative, the Adaptation Initiative. It's ironic, I actually thought that this year I would spend a lot more time on the Adaptation Initiative, which hasn't received the well-deserved level of publicity or political interest or finance. But in any case, I think it's very important to mention that there are now 5 African initiatives led by heads of state. The 2 thematic ones, adaptation and renewable energy, and 3 new initiatives which were actually launched just at the last African AU Summit in January, one on the Sahel region, which is maybe the most vulnerable region and ecosystem, the Congo Basin, and islands. Many people don't know, but we do have 6 small islands in Africa. We have more than 26,000 kilometers of coastal lines. We have more than 2/3 of African countries who have coastal lines and areas. And in most of those countries, the major cities, the capitals, Rabat, Nouakchott, Dakar, Lagos, Luanda. I like Cape Town. It's not a capital, but Cape Town, and up to Cairo or Alexandria. So it is a fundamental issue. So I wanted to really bring back AREI into that more in that framework. And this is what we are trying to achieve in Africa, which doesn't victimize itself, but comes off with solution, extend its hands, and work with partners, all partners. On specific, second point, on the specific elements you have mentioned, I don't have any disagreement with what I've seen on the different survey, nor the recommendations. Actually, throughout the different AREI documents, whether the framework document, the action plan, or what you have seen in the criteria, I think a lot of them, a lot of the elements that you have addressed are actually reflected. I've taken very good notes of your demands, and I do believe there's a number of ways to address most of them. You're right. There is a short-term 10 gigawatt target by 2020 And if we just have 2 or 3 dams, this can be done. You would remember that in the AREI governance framework, we've also had specific goals in terms of ensuring renewable energy services. And it's very important, renewable energy services in the context of sustainable development. And there's really an emphasis on access, power for rural development, and really using the new waves of transformation in terms of, for instance, the very efficient off-grid technology, smart metering, M-banking, and as well some of the new finance instruments which are there. So I would agree with that totally. In terms of ensuring civil society participation, there's a number of ways this can be done. It can be done from the generation of intervention, allowing civil society, local communities to directly or solicit interventions from civil society and local communities and different stakeholders. And I know that this was in the work program of the IDU. This is still in the work program. And this can be done through call for proposal around those specific areas and allowing civil society to directly, instead of just, and so you have 3 ways. That's the first one. So you intervene and you can propose intervention. Second, you talked about having a say at the table in the steering committee. You would recall that there was a Kigali decision, and there's not a steering committee anymore, but a technical committee. And that technical committee is composed of resource people. And I know that there are a lot of experts in civil society. Actually, Professor Sokona spent most of his life in civil society organization. So for a fact, there is expertise in civil society. So there's a possibility for civil society experts to be on the technical committee. And then in the day-to-day work of the IDU, there is possibilities on a day-to-day basis to engage with civil society organization and to consult. Finally, on the way forward, I would have, I think you know what's next. If I were on the board, I don't sit on the board. This is a board of African heads of states and partners. A board of African heads of states, it's unheard of in the history of the African Union. Usually you have a board of ministers or you have a board of directors. This is a board of African heads of states. It doesn't get higher than that from a political point of view. That's the seriousness with which this is being taken. I would have my own 3 recommendations. First, to finalize the governance framework, and I said governance framework because a number of governance institutional issues must be fixed. The governing instrument, rules of procedure, criteria, project, or I call them intervention selection process, terms of reference of the board, arrangements between the board and the trustee. That will compose the set of governance documents, which will then ensure that the parameters are clear. The second, you said that the IDU is outside the bank, but I believe that the IDU needs to have a very clear organigram, needs to have a very clear and revised work program, a budget as well to be adopted, and finally, the engagement with the countries must happen. You must, and that was also planned, that you must consult with the countries, and in a way that all, in a multi-stakeholder way, to allow for private sector, civil society, local communities to be at the table, to hear from them, to sort of inform the intervention. And I know also for a fact that this was, and this is part of the work program of the IDU. So once again, I remain very hopeful and positive. I won't call this a crisis, but in any effort of this unprecedented magnitude, this is an initiative with at least 100 countries around the table. You're bound to have challenges. You're bound to have moments of doubt, if you want to call them that way. But I have no doubt, but we'll all together move forward, and we will make RA deliver on its promise. I have no doubt. Thanks.
Thank you. What's the very latest you can stay?
No, now I have to go out and just tell them I'll be late, and then I'll see.
Okay. So you can all already think about questions you have for Saini. That also goes to our panelists, of course. So I'll give the first round to ask maybe 1 or 2 questions of our government representatives. But while Saini finds out how much longer he can stay, I'd like to give the floor to Frank Versmetz. We've had the pleasure of having you join us for a number of discussions on the initiative already, and I'm happy you're here with us again. As Saini mentioned, this initiative is a partnership. There are development partners who've pledged to provide funding in Paris to the initiative or to the objectives of the initiative. Germany is one of the largest amongst them. In Paris was the largest pledge, actually. So I'd be interested in your perspectives also on what you've heard and where you think, from a German government perspective, the priorities should be in further developing the initiative.
Well, thank you very much, and first for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. And I'm really happy to see the strong interest of a broad range of stakeholders in AREI, and I hope this will continue to be in the same positive spirit as we have seen today. From our perspective as a German government, we were thrilled on the vision of AREI when we saw the initiative presented to the G7 leaders by the head of the African Union, Madame Zuma, in 2015, where she suggested to the German Chancellor at that time, heading the G7, that there should be support from the G7 to this initiative, because it provides a vision, a narrative, how Africa wants to see its future based on a transformation from fossil to renewable, providing access for development, access to energy for development, and highlighting the need to focus on the linkage between climate and development. We thought this was really a very bold pledge from the African heads of state, because it's a decision of the AU to take this route, and we wanted to be proactive and supportive. So that's why at the G7 summit in 2015, we suggested to G7 leaders a message of support to AREI, which all G7 were happy to provide. And we also, as Germany at that time, and it was my personal privilege to do so, managed to have a bold message of support from the G7, as well as Sweden and the Netherlands, to the implementation of AREI objectives at COP21, the promise of providing $10 billion till 2020 in support of AREI. I think what is key is that the initiative is African-led and African-owned, and from our perspective, this includes, and we fully share the perspective laid out by Saini, the civil society at the respective places. In the development of proposals, as well as at the appropriate level in governance. Nevertheless, I would like to point out from our perspective, as it is an African-owned and African-led initiative, it's in the hands of our African partners to provide for the necessary governance agreement. We have been supporting the implementation of AREI. We support the interim delivery unit, and we were very happy in the run-up for the development of the initiative that African partners invited donor representatives to discuss the respective founding documents, the framework document, action plan, project criteria, to consult on the way ahead. And it has been a very productive process from our perspective, pointing to address all the critical needs which are necessary for a transformation in the energy sector and providing access to energy in African countries. From our perspective, what is very much critical is really to include access in the rural areas through different approaches, and we are seeking possibilities to support this access. Germany has been trying in 2016 to align its support to renewable energy with the area work areas. So we have looked on what are the area work areas, as has been outlined on the screen earlier on, and align our support to these work areas. And we provided new commitments in 2016 of around 1.3 billion euros. Lutz has pointed out Germany has pledged the largest amount in COP21. Minister Müller, my minister, had announced 3 billion euros up to 2020. In the meantime, France have made the same level of pledge. So it's France and Germany at this level of contributions to AREI. And I'm very confident that others will follow up with also significant amounts. On the way forward, I think you've heard from Saini what our African partners see as next steps, and I'm very happy to hear that. I would like to refer to 3 elements which I find important. First element, keep up the high political commitment to AREI from African partners. We have a board which is composed of African heads of state, and that speaks for itself on the political priority Africa attaches to the initiative and the implementation of this transition towards renewable. And we think that's a very encouraging political signal for the way Africa wants to take its own future. The second point relates to the need in identifying what are the priorities for implementation, building on a mapping and coordination with other initiatives to allow synergies for implementation, and to identify on the list of project proposals which are then including in a mapping process, where are bottlenecks which needs to be addressed, what are financial needs where donors can contribute, and what are elements on the framework conditions which should be addressed, including through support from donors on technical assistance in designing appropriate and enabling environments for implementation of AREI, including for leveraging also investments from the private sector, because we know that the ambition for achieving 300 gigawatts by 2030, and that's the vision we want to take, will require a mobilization of also private investments. And the third point relates to the need of donors to align their support to energy and sustainable development also to AREI, and bring the development and the climate community together. Because what we are hearing here today on AREI is something we hear in the environment and climate area. When we hear discussions in other areas, the story is not that mature, I would frame it. There are also some skepticism on the right approach for Africa, and we think bringing both communities together will help in implementation. Some brief reactions to the presentations and survey we have seen. I think I would be able to subscribe to almost everything what I've heard. We think it's important to provide for CSO participation in an appropriate manner. We have CSO participation modalities in multilateral financing, climate financing mechanisms. Maybe that's something we can learn also for AREI. We think that's important for the reasons given in the presentations, to provide for transparency, accountability, to support ownership, and to bring the voices of African people to the table, that the donors can hear them, but also that African governments can hear them. So that's, from our perspective, a very important dimension. I stop here and not eat more time from Seni's valuable time in the coordination meeting of the African Group of Negotiators.
Okay. Okay. What I would suggest is to see if there are burning questions from the audience, because we're really pressed for time. Please, no statements, just quick questions, and then we'll try to get reactions from the panelists. There's one here. And one in the back.
What? It's just a hold.
No, it's a mic.
Hello? Oh, okay. Thanks. Carl Matheson from Climate Home. Seni, do you agree with Mr. Sakono that the choice of the way that the 19 projects that were chosen was done in contempt for the AREI principles? And Hashmet, I wanted to ask you, do you, sorry, the 19 projects, the manner that they were chosen, was that, do you agree with this as well, or do you agree with the manner, and can you give any undertaking as to how they might be chosen in the future?
One question in the back. Just throw it. You can. The point of this thing is that you can throw it.
But you might hurt someone.
Yes, and it still works. Very brief question to Mr. Fasmetz. My question rather relates to the fact that maybe citing the report from the International Energy Agency that was released last year on Sub-Saharan Africa's power sector, and the very significant role that Chinese companies play there. It was actually found that 30% of the added capacity was done by Chinese companies. So knowing that Germany is also a global leader in terms of trilateral cooperation, I was wondering if there's any thought from the German government side on working together with China in Africa on realizing AREI.
Thank you. Any other questions that would need to be quick questions? One more, and then we go back to the panel.
Yes, just a question to Augustine. Is Augustine convinced by Seni arguments about how it works in the AREI organization?
Thanks. What I would suggest is that we go in this order. Most of the questions were to the two of you, but I would like to give our civil society panelists to the opportunity also for quick concluding thoughts, or if you have additional questions for Frank and Seni, now is the opportunity also for the civil society panelists to ask them. Paulana, we will start with you.
Donc, je vais revenir en français. Pour conclure, je pense que, comme a dit Augustine dans sa présentation, l'Afrique a une capacité inestimable, un potentiel d'énergie renouvelable. L'Afrique a le soleil, l'Afrique a le vent, l'Afrique a des cours d'eau. Et dans notre démarche, il est question de toucher les jeunes qui doivent travailler qui sont des décideurs de demain, et non de financer toujours les situations d'urgence. Pour nous, nous pensons qu'il est question de toucher les plus jeunes, les enfants, les jeunes, pour qu'ils grandissent avec des notions. Et ce n'est pas beaucoup plus l'éducation, mais beaucoup plus aussi pour préparer les jeunes à la technologie. Parce que nous pensons que s'il n'y a pas de technologie, on doit importer tout de l'Afrique. Si on parle du solaire et qu'on doit importer les panneaux solaires, ce n'est pas une solution durable. Donc, il est question de penser à ce mode de développement et intégrer la jeunesse qui est l'avenir de demain dans tous les échelons. Merci.
Summary in one sentence. Renewable energies are the future of Africa due to its huge potential, and the young generation is aware of this potential and needs to be supported in for this work. Augustine, there was also one question to you. Do you agree with Saini? But also maybe you have additional questions. That was the question. That was, I'm just quoting.
Yeah. Am I convinced with what Saini said? Saini is the chair of the African group. Saini is an ambassador. He's a negotiator. Whether I agree with what he said is a difficult question to answer. But I want to say that that is the right spirit. We need to see the practice. Okay? We cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. Why is Africa still in darkness as far as energy is concerned? Those are some of the questions we're asking. So until and unless we make governance to be a culture of this initiative, it will not work. We know what happens. So the projects that we're already talking about, what was the involvement of the civil society? How are they involved? The future, what does the future hold for us? Those are some of the very pertinent questions that we keep asking, but in a positive way. We are saying we are ready, we are sitting there, get us involved so that it will be for our people, with our people, not just for governments. It is important to have that high political will, but that political will should be transformed into concrete actions on the ground that meet the felt needs of the people, not quick fixing at some stratospheric level. We want to see action, and we think that we have proposed very concrete things to be officially and concretely involved in the decision making, because we bring the voice from the ground. So your question, we have to see how it is practiced on the ground. Thank you.
Okay. As I said before, we all agree that energy is a really key issue of Africa. And we want that this initiative to be more inclusive and project to be really transformative at local levels. As African civil society, I think that we should following up what's happened on the ground. And at international level, we need to work with international network to follow the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Saini, there were a few questions to you, and I guess if I turn Augustine's remark into a question, the question is participation of civil society as experts in technical committees and in the work of the IDU, of course, is very welcome. But what about participation in the actual decision-making bodies as, you know, observers or co-deciders? Both are possible. What about that?
I'll give you a small anecdote. My group tried once to, and this is the Africa group, tried once to co-chair a technical working group with a minister. That didn't go very well. But anyway, the question is easy. I mean, I'm not going to comment on someone's comment because I don't have the full elements. But what I have seen the report of the technical meeting which took place just before the board. And that, from what I know, that technical summary was agreed by all the members of the meeting. And there may be, I don't know, 50 bullets there of points. And those are points that Africa and its partners agreed. And you'll find that on all elements, on all the bullets, there's agreement. There was a specific bullet which made it clear, I don't have the terms, but that projects on an exceptional basis would be presented for the board's consideration. And at the same time, because RAA is not a fund per se, the process, this is not the Green Climate Fund. This is attribution of, this is prioritized, it's a process of prioritization of projects and attribution of resources. So nothing stops an ex post process of, for instance, determining are those projects actually meeting the targets, and if not, there's a possibility for adjustments. The RA board is not the Green Climate Fund, is not the board of the GCF, meaning that the resources which were pledged are not in a bank account that the RA board holds. So you are presenting projects, you are prioritizing projects, and of course there's an accounting. So what I want to say here is there's a lot more to agree. And on some of those principles, if one reads at least that report, that's the report I read, on 95% of the element, the total agreement between Africa and its partners. And on that specific issue, it was presented to the board. I don't have all the elements as to why the board agreed, but I can share two elements. One is that I looked at the list of the projects, and I've tried from an intuitive or on my own to do a small assessment. The first project on that list is a 30 megawatt solar plant in Chad. Well, it so happens that I have spent probably more days in Chad than in my own country in the last 3 months. And I was instructed to go there to see what was going on. Access rate of Chad is 5%. Energy access rate is 5%. It's 15% in the capital city, in N'Djamena. The total installed capacity is 100 megawatt. Total installed capacity, 100 megawatt, total diesel. The price of a kilowatt per hour in Chad is 50 cents, 50 US dollar cents. Chad is right now living maybe the most the most challenging economic, social, financial crisis in its history. It has a humanitarian crisis in the Lake Chad region due to Boko Haram and other. Chad had maybe 60–70% of its resources from oil. It went from 650 million to now $25 million this year. So that project, which will increase the total capacity to worth 30%, have a renewable energy mix now of 30, will probably boost the access in the capital. Access, I'm talking access, not just capacity. I'm talking access, which will move in the capital from maybe 15% in the capital to 25–30%, as well as decrease a little bit the cost of the affordability, because there's that issue which I think is very important. You want to have access in rural areas and in urban areas, as per your survey, but the issue of affordability is also very important. So I ran that analysis on that first project, thinking because I have some intuitive empirical evidence. Will it be approved? When the committee is set up, I think this is highly likely. I've also seen a number of projects which are not generation but grid-related projects, and the AREI framework speaks to that. Speaks to whether you're doing off-grid or on-grid, you'll need some type of a grid. Grid updates is part of the framework document. Actually, even energy trade, so having power pools and energy trade as a way to reduce. So my sense is heads of state made a political decision. And the second point, that's what I wanted to say. The second point is that the two African heads of state which attended that meeting are quite senior. And they have one chaired the African Union last year, the other one is chairing the African Union this year. You can say anything you want about them, but I don't think those two are anybody's puppet. I think those two make their own decisions. And surely they're not going to be influenced in that way by a minister or by a commissioner of the EU. So as an African negotiator, one may like or dislike the political decision because of, for instance, the governing instrument and all the governing framework not being adopted. But a board at least was established. You can disagree with that, and of course that's fair. But what I will not accept is that those two working with them are actually anybody's puppet. That's clearly, that is not the reality. And again, those are heads of states. You know that when you are a negotiator, at the end of the COP, your minister comes and tell you, well, those are the options. Well, I like this option, I don't like that option, and you live with it. If you don't like it, you can resign. Fair. That process then goes to the other level, at an head of state level. But again, as I said, this is the one example. We could do that. And I think where civil society could help as well is to maybe even before the AREI puts in place, you can go through the project, do your own assessment and say, well, we believe that this one shouldn't be an AREI, this one should be AREI, and actually present that as your own contribution because that's work in progress. I think one way civil society could help is actually go through the list and use the AREI criteria and say, well, would that work or not? Finally, why is Africa still in darkness? One thing is clear: your generation and my generation will need to deal with that. And the fact that I'm here chairing the Africa group, for me, is a statement that there is change. Maybe a couple of years ago, someone my age wouldn't be able to sit here. There's change. Change is taking place on the continent. As I indicated, climate change, African heads of state meets every 6 months. Climate change is on the agenda, and there's climate decisions every 6 months. This never ever happened 3, 4, 5 years ago. You don't only have now a committee, which is chaired by one of you have 5 committees, 5 thematic. I mean, give me any other region in the world where you have 5 heads of state heading commission, different commission. Adaptation, renewable energy, Congo Basin, islands, renewable energy. So changes, but of course, do we all need to push this? Do we all need, of course, as negotiators, we have to put a lot of pressure. We have to bring the issues. We have to yes, you need to, we all need to work in this. You don't need to believe in, we need to all work together. I think we have allowed for CSOs, and we're allowing CSOs to come to our meeting to share. We have to do all of this together. And it's a fight. It's a fight. We have to continue. It's not just heads of state. And as I said, what I will make sure, so that I can actually put pressure on you, is that the IDU allows for CSOs so that my brother who is there in Cameroon can come up with projects, can come up with intervention, but local communities come with the projects they have, come with the intervention, because indeed, you should be a project, you should be able to present intervention. So I think it's very important for me. One of the ways to put AREI back in the people's hand is to allow the people, not just to have a voice, to allow them to come up with intervention.
Thanks. Seni, you have to
No, you have as a local government, you can present a project. That's what we need to allow. We need to allow local government, we need to allow CSOs to present project. Yes, that's the process. And I'll tell you that process will be there. A couple months from now, we will be asking you what has been your contribution, what projects and program and intervention you've brought to the board.
I want to be fair and give Frank Vesmetz 1 minute for one closing thought, because we are 10 minutes over our time limit. You have to coordinate your group. But to be fair, of course, you should have the chance as well.
I think there were two questions directed to me. One on the process of decision-making on the AREI board. And Germany is not represented by a minister at the board, so I have no insight on how the decision-making took place. And I will refrain from commenting on the substance of how this developed. I would, however, point to the views of Seni, that who is sitting on the board and what is their view on their attitude towards taking decisions. So I think we should be very, very careful in characterizing the decision-making at the board. And be careful in conveying certain images which have a very critical connotation from my perspective. What I can say is on the experience I had for several years in sitting on boards of funds, like the GEF or the GCF, is that it's always collective decision of all participants. And it's not one board member or several board members from one group or several groups which dominate the decision-making. It's a joint decision-making, and it's a collective body which makes decisions. And this always implies, as Seni pointed out, also political judgments, which board members need to do, in particular if this is at the level of heads of state. On trilateral cooperation with China, I think I would like the idea. I would even like more if China would engage in AREI without any trilateral relationship. Trilateral approaches are rather difficult to achieve, and particularly if the distance between actors is, as in the case of Germany and China, pretty far, not only in terms of geographical distance, but also in other dimensions. So it's a nice idea. We will seek opportunities for that, but I think it would be more important that China would engage in AREI without any trilateral approach.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for bearing with us longer than we had time. I think this discussion in the last few minutes proves that we need more side events like these to engage on this issue more. And I look forward to seeing you certainly at the next COP at another AREI side event, and hopefully we can check in on progress, that we have more transparency and more possibility for CSOs to engage from the beginning, so we don't have to criticize projects after they have been agreed by the board, but that we can engage in a constructive way from the beginning. Thank you very much.